You're listening to another Ambitious Entrepreneur Network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
You're listening to the award-winning podcast, The Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, featuring business leaders to help you navigate a constantly changing marketplace. Want to become known as a trusted authority while building a thriving business you love? The Ambitious Entrepreneur Show will show you how. Here's your host, Annemarie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of the Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, brought to you by the Influence Alliance. And of course, that's the business building community for coaches and consultants who want to make a much bigger impact in the world with their message, whilst also build a profitable and scalable business. And yes, I'm your host, Annemarie Cross. Now, my guest today says rejection is not about you, it's about them. Failure is just another lesson in life. So joining me on today's show is two guests, Aron Gaudet and Gita Pullapilly. Now, Aron and Gita are Emmy-nominated filmmakers. They are a husband and wife writing and directing team making Hollywood movies. Now, their new film, Queenpins, releases on Paramount on the 30th of September, which actually is today here in Australia. So we're in your future, Aron and Gita. So today they're going to talk about their innovative approach to leadership and how they approached filmmaking during COVID. They're also going to talk about how leadership approached, or how this leadership approach saved them both time and money, and as well as how their model of leadership is now inspiring others outside of Hollywood to adapt and collaborate in new and unique ways. So I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from them. So welcome, guys, to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess if you went back to about 2 years now and said that the experience that we would all be experiencing in this world, we would never have predicted the change. And I know, particularly in the industry that you're in, you guys just really just business just shut down, didn't it for you, alongside many other businesses around the world?
Yeah, for sure. It was not only did they shut down, but when they tried to start back up, the costs were exorbitant in order to bring on COVID teams to be able to work with productions on set. Like, we had to create a whole new department called the COVID unit to actually be able to resume production, which costs millions and millions of dollars.
And we were supposed to start production on our film. We were supposed to open production offices on March 16th of 2020. And that Friday, March 13th, we had finished a week of location scouting, and we started reading that Harvard University had shut down, and we were like, oh, that doesn't sound good. And we realized we would not be opening production offices that Monday, and everything kind of fell apart for 6 months as we tried to figure out how do we do this during COVID.
Wow. And one of the things that I will mention, and I mentioned to you before we went live, and I'm going to explain that for the listeners and the viewers today, because I know that we have a few of you there. I have an equipment that is going on in the background. So it is unfortunately limiting my ability to hear. However, you're not here to hear me. So I'm just going to ask some great questions and have Aron and Gita for you to share your expertise. So now, faced with the industry challenges, not being able to do business the way that you had done. And obviously, you know, here in Australia, we had shutdowns. People were not able to go to work. There was limited amount of people as for some of the industries that were allowed to work. So where they may have had 100% workforce normally, that went right down to 25%. There was a huge navigation, having to go through that to navigate through this, what we're now calling kind of the new normal, if you will. What is such a thing as new normal? Take us back to that time. So obviously things were starting to shut down. You realized that you would not be able to continue as you would normally do. What did you do as leaders of that business? What were the first steps that you took?
Well, the first step we had to understand is, was it safe and was it ethically right for us to start asking cast and crew to come together and start making a movie? Was it going to be safe, and is it the right thing to do, or was it worth waiting and putting on hold? And that was 6 months of deliberation, trying to understand the process to try to create a safe set
what the cost would
what
be.
the cost would be to do that at the time. Like we were still figuring out all the testing systems that had to be in place, creating different zones that needed to be organized.
And the guilds and unions in Hollywood were doing the same thing and releasing their guidelines of, you know, what each set had to do, the minimum requirements that every set had to do.
Yeah, so that was the first part of it. But then the second part of it was once we realized there was a safe way to do this. In fact, the sets were actually going to be safer than anyone going back home into their own lives and community, because it was so diligently testing. And then we also ended up having these bubbled zones so that, you know, the key people where, you know, the actors, the directors, like it couldn't be shut down if we ended up getting COVID. So we were in like the A+ zone. Then there was an A zone and a B zone and a C zone.
People in those outer zones couldn't really come near all the people in the A+ zone, because that was the people that if we lost one of them, the movie shut down.
Right. And we knew that if it shut down, we wouldn't be able to start back up. So there was a lot of pressure for us to make sure that we didn't shut down.
Yes.
But also we were realizing, like Gita was saying, that it really wasn't going to be as much about keeping them safe. We knew we had the protocols in place to keep them safe on set. But what was worrisome is, how do we get their buy-in? How do we lead in a way so that when they go home at night, they're being safe and they're not bringing COVID to the set? Because that was really, you know, we were testing every day. We were wearing masks and face shields and doing all of these things. But when they go home, what are they doing? So how do we get a large group of people, 150 people, to all buy in and make sacrifices when they go home each night?
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. I was going to say, because your team, when you think of all of the people that are involved in the production of a set, are multiple divisions, if you will. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to be able to use a term because I don't know what that is, but multiple people, different divisions. I would imagine that you've got different rules, like here in Australia, there's different unions for different, if you think of the building industry, you know, different factions. And so you've got to, as a leader, not only communicate and maintain an open line of communication, but also, as you said yourself here, Aron, inspire and empower them to whatever you decide that needs to be done, that they continue to do that, because one person can impact the entire company, can't it? With one person, the whole company shuts down. That's what happened here in Australia. So I would imagine. So what did you do? What approach did you take?
Yeah, well, so I should just say in 2019, I participated in a program called the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. And former presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and then the libraries of George H.W. Bush and Lyndon Johnson all came together, and they said, let's figure out how to build leaders that have the values that we stand for. And so what we did was, through that program, I really learned so much about leadership, but in particular, servant leadership. And what I learned was that servant leadership is really all about collaboration and respect and communication and listening. And that ended up becoming such a critical part to our process and our approach.
And it's so much about putting your ego aside in service to whatever it is that you're, you know, trying to attain. So in this case, it was getting everyone to put their ego aside on a daily basis and be in service to the story we were telling. And that was something that, you know, wasn't always going to be simple. You know, we look at Hollywood, there's a lot of film sets that are very ego driven, you know, or directors that lead by ego. So when we come in and we're talking about removing ego, and we're constantly preaching, if we all put our egos aside for this 30-day film shoot and we be in service to the story, we can get to the finish line. It was a different kind of message than I think a lot of them were used to hearing.
Yeah, and part of that process is when we were in prep, preparing for production, we wrote a letter to our cast and our crew. Each and every single member got that letter. And we spoke from the heart. We explained, we knew the sacrifices they were going to have to make. but we hope that they would come and work with us together, to collaborate with us, to make something special. Because once we would all come out of this pandemic, we knew that so many people were suffering and so many people were struggling. And wouldn't this be the most amazing gift to give people, is a movie that could get them to laugh and enjoy and be with their friends and family and laugh for about an hour and 40 minutes.
But we also really laid out, here's the journey we're all going to go on, that we're asking you to go on. Here's why we think it's important to go on this journey. Here's what we promised to bring to the table each day. Here's what we're asking of you to bring to the table each day. And really wanted it to be something that if they ever questioned what we were doing, they could go back to this letter and read it again and know exactly what we were all there for.
The other aspect of what we did was, with our cast, we have Kristen Bell and Vince Vaughn and Paul Walter Hauser and Joel McHale and Kirby Howell Baptiste, all these amazing, talented actors. And we said, work with us to collaborate. And once we set the example of full collaboration, it'll pass down to all the rest of the set. And it was such a powerful experience, because knowing that we could all come in and just be creative was not only helpful to the process, but it also opened up so many other great avenues and ideas and creativity, that everybody started feeling like this was a family. And then it felt like it was a family. They wouldn't want to let the family members down.
Yeah. I mean, everything that you're saying, I think would have been very much, when I'm saying the word adopted, people realized that what was going on was significant, and many industries did have to shut down. I mean, we have people here in Australia that have not been able to operate for well over 12 months, if not more. And so because you've got the privilege, if you will, of being able to collaborate, come together, yes, it looks very different to what it may have done previously. It sounds as if that whole collaboration, let's remove ego. I mean, no one really wants ego on there, because, there's a whole lot of things that you've got to navigate towards that. Did you find that even after that letter and that continual communication, that people continued to appreciate that? Or as leaders, you still needed to communicate that across the organization wide? Because sometimes you can share a message and it'll land for a little while, and then things start to go back to what it was, perhaps. Did you find that it continued, that message? What did you do to maintain that message across the company through that time?
One thing that we did was every single morning, and our day would usually start before anyone else's. So we would be up at 3 a.m. or 3:30 in the morning. Every single morning we sent a quote to the entire cast and crew. So, Kristen Bell gets the email with this inspirational quote in it, and, a day player actor that might not be showing up until day 25 gets the same quote, or
the gaffer, or the grip,
and it was just sort of like a quote that to us inspired us, and hopefully would inspire them, that sort of related to what we were dealing with that day. So we would do things like that, where it was partly about the quote, but it was partly about making sure every single person on the cast and crew knew that they had access to us and could reach out and talk to us. And we did these core value exercises with our department heads and our actors.
And these core value exercises are really about identifying the 3 core values that really represent how you want to live. And if, you were at your funeral and all these people came to speak about you, if you lived your core values, they would talk about what those core values were in their own way. But if, one of your core values was integrity or joy or ambition, like they would talk about that. And that would mean that you lived your core values. And so we did these exercises with, for example, we did it with all of our cast, but, and our department heads. And one of the reasons we did that was we knew by doing these core values exercises, it brings you so much closer together. You build this trust and this bond within each other, but also you understand, like, okay, if someone's core value is family and we were shooting over the Thanksgiving holiday, we knew that it was going to be a very hard sacrifice to ask that person to have to work over the holiday.
Yes.
So how you approach that conversation, what you do within that situation is all very important.
But it ended up being a real just, you might spend 45 minutes doing this exercise and it feels like you suddenly have known this person for months because you're talking about the very core of the person and, what are their foundational beliefs. So it would open up very deep conversation. So it just builds, every movie is a startup company. It doesn't exist. And then suddenly when the money comes in from the financier, it's a race and you're suddenly bringing 150 or 200 people together in a startup company that's only going to exist for a couple of months.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. You've got different personalities. There's time frames and pressures and so forth. What I love about what you've shared about the core values, and as leaders, you were there. You kept an open door policy. If someone needed to talk about something, to talk it through. I think any industry moving forward needs to have a plan or a strategy to have that in place because of all of the things that people will need to navigate and go through. I mean, a number of people are struggling with the kind of the grief and loss of family members and so forth. And I think as leaders, no matter what industry we're in, we need to be aware of that and need to create an environment where individuals can feel that they can share that. And I think you were saying, Aron, so beautifully that you realize that, hey, we know that this particular key team member has a role to perform, and in your case, perform, because that's exactly what they do, or the cast around the crew that supports the cast. But if you're not creating an environment in which they can be their best, if that means taking a little bit of time to talk about some things, once that's done, then we can come together. And I think any leader needs to appreciate that. There's a comment that was shared. You talked about servant leadership. And someone said, Jesus Christ is the best example of that. Servant leadership, really, when you say that to me, and yeah, I totally agree, Jesus certainly exuded that. He was the servant king, as we know, is to think about other people's first, isn't it? Rather than yourself, or look at something through their eyes, through their shoes, like walking, someone's in a mile in someone's shoes. There's an appreciation of that person and where they're at, that opens up, more discussions, more empathy, if you will. Did you start to see that trying to trickle down throughout the organization?
For sure. For instance, when we were approaching, we were shooting in October, November, December of 2020 in Los Angeles, which was sort of the height of the pandemic here. And, it's pre-vaccine and it's all of these things we were facing, but we were shooting through the election here and through Thanksgiving, like Gita said. So we were asking them to sacrifice a lot when they would go home, basically quarantine when you go home. And one of our assistant directors stepped up one day and she said, I'm making a pledge right now that, over Thanksgiving, I'm not going to celebrate with my extended family. I'm going to just be very careful and stay home. And I'm doing that because I believe in what we're doing here. And I don't want to be the one that might shut it down or stop it. And, it was a really powerful moment when she made this sacrifice and sort of publicly made it, where everybody sort of took that to heart. And it wasn't one of us saying it.
Right.
It was just a crew member that had really become very passionate about what we were doing and wanted to see us get to the finish line.
And I think it was also important, when we have to know if we've done our job right, we need to know when we have to be the messenger and when other people need to be the messenger as well. And in that case, it was really important that it was her speaking up and saying that, because, of course, Aron and I don't want our film to shut down. We worked so hard. We wrote the script. We're now directing this film. We know every single day when you're getting to day 26 and day 27, you're getting so close to the finish line. And if you shut down, that's it.
It all goes away.
It goes away. There's no movie to be made. And so, we're at home stressing about it, but knowing there's nothing we can do. And we just have to know that fate will determine whatever happens. And thank God we were able to get through day 30 and to completely succeed. When we finished day 30, that following week, the city of Los Angeles shut down.
Wow. Wow.
And another one of the obstacles too that we were dealing with is on a film set, it's so much about trying to build these bonds and, like Gita says, make it feel like a family, because you're working so hard every day and it's a lot of tension and stress. But now you can't come near one another and you can't see each other's faces. And we started realizing that there are people that worked on our film that we were very close to. We could probably pass them on the street now. We might not recognize them because we never saw,
Your eyes look familiar.
Yeah, it was normally on a film set, the directors get pulled away during the lunch because we have all of these meetings. But on day 30, there was no next day to plan for. So we were actually eating with everyone else outdoors. And, Gita looked over and she was like, "Who's that?" And I'm like, "That's Yannicka. You love Yannicka." And she's like, "That's what she looks like." And, we were seeing people's faces for the first time because we were never allowed to be around one another with our masks off.
It was having a family and then realizing, oh, wait a minute. Like, I don't know what my family member looks like.
But it was
always sounds familiar. Where have we met?
Yeah.
We worked together, Gita, for the last 30 days. I mean, all of the things that you shared today, I think it's just brilliant. And a number of conversations that I've had with people is that, a change to leadership approach or a change to maybe a product or a service that they were offering, what started off as an experiment actually worked so well. It's become now a main revenue stream for the business. And I love how you've said this leadership approach actually saved time and money. Share a little bit more about that. I mean, this would have been a wonderful result of the leadership. So share some of the things that you saw that impacted the business.
Well, for example, we talked about how we did the core values with all of our actors. So we did the core values exercise with Kristen Bell and Kirby Howell-Baptiste. And we talked about their personal core values, but then we also did that same exercise and we said, let's do that with your characters. And as they started talking about their characters, what we realized when we were in production is when we were trying to discuss a scene and whether Kristen's character would do something or not, she would come up to us and she would say, "Oh, I think Connie would do this because one of her core values is achievement." And we started seeing them make choices in their acting based off of what those core values were for their character. And it became something that was saving time because they were able to quickly make a choice in their acting because I think that maybe they knew their character that much deeper or at a foundational level so that it would be like, oh, well, in this situation, I really think she would do this. Exactly. It saved time and money because on set, we weren't debating it for lengthy periods of time. We very quickly knew how to just be very effective in making some creative choices.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about core values because it's something that, in the HR area and even job seeking, my career many years ago was in the career space. And often we would find if someone was working in an organization or in a role that all of a sudden something changed and they weren't able to put their finger on it. And a job that they loved before is now not as fulfilling and meaningful to them. We identified when we did a little bit of exploration that maybe management or the leadership team had changed. And so the core values of the company had changed slightly, was not so aligned with the individual employee. And that was one of the reasons why, some of those core values were not being met. So hearing you say that, is that now something that you're going to continue to do moving forward that perhaps you may not have done, spent, that time dedicated to identifying what are your core values as an individual? What are ours as an organization? And hey, let's explore the core values of your character so that you can, with integrity and alignment, step into that. Is that something you're going to continue to do because of the impact you've seen it have?
For sure.
100%.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the leadership model that we used, we would use all of it again with COVID or without COVID. I think what we just realized as we were doing it is, oh, if we don't get this right, we're never going to get the buy-in that we need in this time to really succeed. So it became just so much more valuable. All of them are such great leadership principles that we would use in any production. But it just felt like in this production, if we didn't have them, we never would have been able to pull it off.
But also, I think even just navigating Hollywood, it's such a tough, brutal business where you constantly feel rejection. You feel the pressure to, give in when sometimes it's not the right decisions. And I think, thank God, Aron and I have really focused on what our core values are. So we know when we are faced with tough challenges and obstacles, we know how to respond to them in a much more constructive and mature way than we ever did when we were probably in our 20s.
But I also think one thing that helps us as a married couple and co-writers, co-directors, is that we are the first example they can look to see how collaborative we are. How collaborative are we with each other? So they see that all of the time, that it's not like one of us is dominating over the other in creative conversations, in the script writing, in the directing process. Everything is shared equally. So they're able to see that first example in the two of us. And then they see it that we're collaborative with all of them in the same way that we're collaborative with each other. And we kind of joke, whenever we work with people, it's really bringing them into our marriage. In this case, it was bringing, 150 people into our marriage. But I think it's good if you were just a solo director, you would have to prove to them, no, trust me, I'm collaborative. But they see it between the two of us all day, every day. So they see that collaboration.
We are the example that they can look to when we talk about what does collaboration truly mean.
Yeah. And it's so important, isn't it, as leaders, to not only say something, but to role model it and to actually be it, that your approach and your attitude continues to align with the values and the expectations that you're asking your team, to give back. And one of the things that I've learned over the many years, and I'd love your feedback on this too, is that, sometimes we can get a group of people together and their core values are very different. And some of their beliefs may be very different too. And I think we've almost gotten to a stage that if someone's belief is different than yours, you take offense to it and you try and prove that your belief is right. But I think if we can get to a stage where we can collaborate and still have a respectful, amicable relationship with another person, even though their beliefs may be very different from ours, we can still collaborate. And having an appreciation of some people's core values and where they develop their beliefs, that we don't try and prove them wrong and we're right. And it can bring a bit more harmony and stability in the workplace when we understand or have a bit of a deeper understanding of why someone may respond and react in a certain way, and not let it become an offense, but rather, well, that's the way that they approach it, and that's fine. This is the way I approach it, and that's fine. And together we can still collaborate towards the common vision. Would you say that that's become more apparent now that you have and will continue to spend more time in kind of that collaboration piece and having that open communication between team members, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But I also would say, the most important thing when you collaborate is you have to agree on what the goal is and what the mission is.
What is your destination?
Exactly. And you can disagree, as we talked about in our servant leadership letter to our cast and crew, but you have to agree. You can disagree.
On the way to on the journey, you can disagree as long as you continue to agree what the destination is.
The mission and the outcome is important. And it's a shared outcome, isn't it? You want to get top quality footage, if you will, working together as a team. So at the end of the 30 days, you've got all of the film, the ability to create this incredible story. Yes.
But if you are clear with what the goal is, then there's really, if you're collaborating without your ego, you're removing the emotion of who's right and who's wrong. And you can just debate the path that you're taking. Yeah. And that is something that we continually have to strive for and work with our cast and crew. And I think it's something that, even Aron and I, when we're writing, it's also very hard if you have a great idea in your head, but it may not push the story forward in the way that we need to in the script. We'll debate it. And then we have to step back and say, well, wait, is this emotion because I just think it's a fun idea, or does this actually serve the story? And what serves the story for us trumps everything.
Yeah. 30 days, you've said that a number of times now, is when you had from start to finish. Is that typically a time frame that as filmmakers you work towards, or was the 30 days a more shortened version of what normally may have taken 60 days?
I mean, production days, it really all depends on the budget. And for our budget level of a film, typically it's around, 30 shooting days.
Okay.
If it's, $150 million huge blockbuster budget, they may be shooting for 90 or 120 days or longer. And when we say 30 shoot days, I mean, we still have, 8 weeks of prep beforehand where we're all working for 2 months just preparing for production. And then when you start production, it's 30 days of 5-day weeks. So again, like it's spread out longer. So we're really all together and working together for, 4 or 5 months to do that production. But it's like those 30 production days are everything, because that's when you're actually capturing things and putting them in the can that are going to become the building blocks of your movie.
Yeah.
And those days, time is money. Like that's when it's ticking. Like during prep, you can sit there and have debates and talk things through. During production, you don't have time for that on set.
No, because you've got people hanging around. And the reason I asked that, it was just of interest. I find, your industry quite fascinating, and not really an industry that I know that much about. But I would imagine that through some of the leadership principles that you've now been you've been talking through with us, that there are some things that you might have shortened. As you said, you didn't spend so much time debating how a character should be. Here are the core values. This was suggested. Makes sense. Let's run with it. And sometimes some of these changes in your leadership approach can impact time and money, as you say, too, and something that you continue to do in the future.
Or one tweak that we made, talk about, who speaks first.
Oh, well, so, there's very few female directors in Hollywood that have been able to succeed in meaningful ways. And thank God there's been there have been some before me that have been able to prove their way, but looking for role models in this industry was very, very hard. And typically as a leader, I would look and see how men would behave, and I would try to replicate that. Even though I have a higher pitched voice, I'm much more delicate, I would, try to put a facade on that this is who I am, and I'm going to make sure this set's running properly. And every time it just felt wrong to me, and I felt uncomfortable. I never felt like I was being who I needed to be as a leader. And I went through this program, the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, and it was very empowering for me to realize that, who I am already is a leader. I just have to own the characteristics. And I need to just build the rapport and trust with my team. And that's how you get the respect. It's through trust and making good decisions, but also like being able to laugh with them and joke with them and have this bond with them. All of that is good leadership. And so what I realized was in that program, it taught us something that was really important. Was I would go into rooms with Aron and we would pitch projects, and I never felt like, I was being heard by some of these executives. And
even if we're being equal between each other, they may not be looking at us as equals, because I am to them much more in the mold of what they're used to than she is. So they're looking to be like, okay, is one of them sort of the leader over the other one?
And what we learned from this process of this program was when I go into a room with Aron, it's so important that I speak first. No matter what I say, it's important that we come in and I say first. And the reason being is that when you're in a room with a group of people, you should always look to see who is maybe more of the weaker person in that room, or is perceived to be.
Who would be perceived to be the most vulnerable?
The most vulnerable is the correct term, exactly. Because then if you empower them to speak first, it then empowers the entire room to speak, and they are open to actually saying, oh, I can speak now too. I have a voice in this room.
So beyond even just Gita, it would also be if we're going into a production meeting and, there's 15 people in there, and there's, somebody who's normally very quiet and maybe a little more, withdrawn, giving them the floor, allowing them, just what do you think? Where do you stand on this? Giving them that moment to speak up and say what they think. It opens it up to everybody in the room. If the biggest alpha in the room is the one that speaks first, well, everybody below them are all wondering, can I give my opinion?
Right.
If this
It's a
person
great pickup as a leader to be able to see that and then create an environment in which you encourage those perhaps more reserved people to share their voice.
But what that does is it brings out the best ideas, right? Otherwise, those great ideas will never be heard. And what I realized, it was a night and day experience. Something so simple as me speaking first changed the dynamics in these rooms instantly. And just a little subtle detail makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And I would imagine, Gita, that you, by doing that and having that been done consistently, eventually the entire team also looks to you, isn't it? And will look to the person who perhaps may have sat more quietly because there was no opportunity for them to get their voice in. But now, because they've been part of the conversation, they're also invited, on an ongoing basis. I love that. I could continue talking to you for hours. I mean, and I know we've just really scratched the surface, but thank you so much for coming and sharing, the things that you did, the changes that you adopted in the way that you led, and you've really shown that some of these changes you're going to continue to do because they made such an impact in the environment and ultimately the outcome, because there was so much pressure and complexities around just doing the role because of what happened. How can people connect? What's the best way? Tell us a little bit about the movie, when it's coming out, all of those good things.
Yeah. Well, Queenpins comes out in Australia. It's already out now on Paramount Plus, and it is
in the US, comes on Paramount Plus in about 2 hours.
Yeah, so everyone can come and see Queenpins then. Queenpins is it's inspired by the true story of two women in Phoenix, Arizona, who end up counterfeiting coupons and making over $40 million off of this counterfeit coupon scam. And postal inspectors and a loss prevention officer have to track them down. And it's a fun comedy that has Kristen Bell and Kirby Howell-Baptiste and Paul Walter Hauser and Vince Vaughn in it.
Wow. Fantastic. Well, we look forward to seeing that. And I know in some places cinemas are actually opening up as well. And so that's going to be a new experience. We here in Melbourne, I don't know if you've kept up kind of with what's happening out in the world. Not that we want this title, but apparently here in Melbourne, we are the world's most lockdown city in the world. So not a title that we would boast with, but it's been very challenging. So any stories and movies such as that sounds wonderful, because it kind of gives you a little bit of kind of 90 minutes or so, however long the movie is, of escapism, being able to see things through those actors' eyes.
Yeah.
We look forward to keeping in touch with your audience. Aaron and I are both on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn. So
And we've got all of the details, and we're live streaming across a number of different platforms. So we'll certainly go back and tag you in this post so that they can connect with you too and follow along. Because as we know now, of course, with so many more technologies, a lot more people are online now and being able to connect that way too. So thanks, guys, for coming on the show and sharing your story and how you came up with this innovative leadership approach, and now are going to be certainly moving forward using that and continuing to adopt that as when can we across any industry that we're in.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having us, for sure.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series.